General Assembly has adopted a resolution in the last 24 hours that demands that Russia immediately withdraw its military from Ukraine after more than 2 days of an extraordinary debate which saw the Ukrainian ambassador accuse Russia of genocide. 141 of the 193 member states voted for the non-binding resolution. South Africa was among the 35 countries that abstained from the vote. Now, this is a non-binding vote, as we've been saying, and for more on this, we're joined by Good Governance Africa's Director of Research and Programs, Dr. Ross Harvey, as well as Amnesty International Regional Director for Eastern Europe, Struthers. A very good evening to you both and welcome to the program. If I can begin with you then, Dr. Ross, what is your take on South Africa's explanation that it chose to abstain yesterday because the resolution in its current form would not have been helpful as far as the push for dialogue and mediation in the conflict is concerned?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think that, in short, this is a disingenuous position, unfortunately, on the behalf of the South African government. The time for negotiation seems to have passed long ago. The Ukraine has been invaded for over a week, and the opportunity for negotiation seems to have passed by a long time ago. And this idea that not standing up in favor of the citizens of Ukraine and Russia, by the way, who don't seem to want a war at all, seems to me an expression of wishing for something that can't happen. And in fact, what we should be doing, quite frankly, in the name of good governance, is standing up with the rest of the world and saying this is not acceptable behavior. It makes a mockery of the world order.
And Marie, what does it really matter, I wonder, given that the vote itself by the General Assembly yesterday is mainly symbolic and would not in any way, even if all countries had endorsed it, stop the fighting?
I'd like to just follow up on what my colleague said by stating that the International Criminal Court has now launched an official investigation into possible war crimes or atrocities or crimes against humanity committed on Ukrainian soil. This is a very good thing. We have at least 38 states that have made this request to start an investigation to the prosecutor's office. It's good also for two reasons. One is that all the evidence about possible war crimes will be collected and held in one place and subject to a criminal investigation. Two, if a resolution or an indictment is produced by the International Court, it will show to the world that war crimes have been committed on Ukrainian territory.
And you speak of war crimes, Marie. The Russian government has been criticized for the deaths of civilians in Ukraine. Over 200 are now known to have died, more than that. And what the Russian government has said since the early days of this invasion is that what has happened in Ukraine is that Russian forces have used civilians as human shields, and that is why we're seeing a civilian death toll. Your take?
Russia's track record of its military forces with regard to respect for international humanitarian and human rights law is abysmal. We have only to turn to its military forces' activities in Syria, at home in Chechnya, and in Georgia. We have documented war crimes by the Russian military forces via their use of cluster munitions, ballistic missiles, etc., that are banned under international humanitarian and human rights law. So I would treat the information coming from all sides with great caution, but the track record of the Russian military is not a good one.
And Dr. Ross, let me come back to you. South Africa then yesterday abstained from the vote, as we've already said, but what does the country have to do now to make sure that when we emerge on the other side of this crisis, it is on the right side of history?
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult position to come back from, and unfortunately this is in continuity with a long line of very bizarre voting behavior at the UN General Assembly. South Africa's track record in this respect is not honourable, and nor is it easy to make sense of in rational terms. So they've unfortunately made their mark, and I think that they're going to have to be called to account for it. I'm not sure that there's anything they could do right now to actually redeem something which was an opportunity to stand up against wrong.
Okay, do you believe then that the South African government put relations with Russia and the economic ties via BRICS membership above what many have been saying was a moral issue and human rights issue yesterday?
Yes, I do. I think there comes a point at which one's trade relationships or the negative effects thereof because of something like this are frankly irrelevant to the considerations in play. We've got 1 million displaced people leaving the Ukraine, and if the reason for South Africa's abstention was a matter of its trade relationship with Russia and the other BRICS countries, barring Brazil, because Brazil did actually, to their credit, vote in favor of the resolution, then we just simply have to say sometimes your principles have to outweigh your perception of the impact on the trade relationship. Nobody cares about the trade relationship in the current context.
And Marie, I want to talk to you about something that was said today by the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who basically said there appears to be an attachment to a narrative of absolute good, absolute evil. In this case, he would believe that the world is seeing the Russians, the West at least, sees the Russians as absolute evil in this situation. The Russians have also said that have asked, in fact, why no one is talking, they say, about alleged abuses of ethnic Russians and other people in the east, the separatist regions. Why is that not happening?
I think we are in the middle of a disinformation war, and indeed Ukraine has been, as has Russia, since 2014 in a disinformation war. 2014 was the year when Russia started to support in every way, economically, militarily, culturally, security-wise, information-wise, the Russian-backed separatists in the Donbass. So you have to weigh up each party's information very, very carefully in this instance. We certainly in 2014 documented grave abuses by both sides, including grave abuses by paramilitary groups. But we have a team of experts who are around the clock verifying video evidence. We have military experts, digital experts who corroborated the video evidence around the use of cluster munitions and missiles with interviews with people on the ground and with other video and photographic evidence. And we've documented we've looked in depth into 10 cases where we've discovered grave violations of international human rights law, and many of them we think point to the Russian military because of the location of the Russian military at the time, and as has been mentioned by myself and my colleague, the Russian military's track record. But we are looking obviously at all parties.
Dr. Ross Harvey, how do you begin to address, as some have suggested, the security concerns of both sides when NATO had made it clear even before this invasion that it was simply not going to grant Russia's demand for a commitment to never allow Ukraine to be part of the security alliance? But you've also got the Russians who are not stopping their invasion, which is the main demand of the Ukrainians at this moment.
I mean, so we have an impasse, and unfortunately it's Ukrainian citizens that are the victims of this awful impasse. The Russians are playing brinkmanship, and we're in a position, unfortunately, where the West is largely hamstrung in response, and Ukrainians are standing up as strongly as they can. Putin's demand, of course, is that Ukrainians lay down all arms and simply surrender. And that would be a capitulation that would have terrible ramifications and would essentially set precedent for an anarchic order, which it seems to me is what Putin wants, and in the same breath has made a mockery of Russia's position on the UN Security Council by violating its own precepts.
Anne-Marie, let me get your take on what Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said twice now in the last 24 hours, that the main aim of Russia is basically to erase Ukraine, Ukrainians, their culture, their tradition. Today, a French aide, an aide to the President Emmanuel Macron, according to the AFP news agency, speaking after a phone call between Macron and Putin, said that President Macron believes that worse is to come and that Putin is aiming to seize the whole of Ukraine.
We've seen in the past few days fighting, missile attacks, sabotage attacks throughout almost the whole territory of Ukraine, with the exception of some parts of the west, which is, by the way, where there are 1 million people displaced within Ukraine, and there's 1 million that have crossed the border. So that's an awful lot of people that are on the move. Again, going back to the track record of the Russian military and the fact that Russia's military has so far used air, water, and land techniques, and now increased use of outlawed cluster munitions, etc. We are fearful, and many observers are, that the same approach is being used as was used in places like Grozny or Aleppo in Syria, sort of a scorched earth technique, if you like. Goodness forbid. We hope not, but again, the track record doesn't look good, and the way they are increasingly using more and more missiles and targeting, or the missiles, regardless of which side they come from, are landing on civilian objects is very worrying.
The Ukrainians, and Marie, as a final thought, have lost some goodwill for people, especially people who abhor racism, because of the racist treatment suffered by African students and other African foreigners who say they were not allowed to board the very first trains out of Ukraine as people fled areas including the capital, Kiev. Some say even when they arrived at the border towns, such as Poland, they experienced much of the same racist treatment and racial profiling. Is that part of Europe a particularly racist one that is anti-black?
I won't say it's anti-racist or anti-black. I would say we haven't documented these incidents yet ourselves, but we're sending researchers to the border to look at that particular situation. Our call is for all the countries that border Ukraine to respect the 1951 Convention on Refugees. They are internationally bound to allow everyone, despite race, age, ethnicity, to enter into their territory and to have access to adequate and safe protection.
Thank you very much for that. That was Good Governance Africa Director of Research and Programs, Dr. Ross Harvey, as well as Amnesty International's Regional Director for Eastern Europe, Marie Struthers.